All right, in this talk, we're going to get into Chapter 1 of AT Fomenko's How It Was in Reality. Now, if you haven't seen the first part, the introductory part that starts this whole thing off, go watch that first before you get here so that you can get the basic idea of the kind of stuff we're going to cover. And if you're coming back to this after a little while of not watching any of this, don't forget, AT Fomenko is a chronologist, and the way he approaches chronology is through mathematics and using, of course, real scientific evidence and interpreting the real scientific evidence correctly and objectively, which means that he is going to come to different conclusions than what you are used to from the mainstream. And there's going to be a lot of things that in this work that he talks about that deals with a lot of mainstream stuff that we've all been preconditioned. I mean, we've been preconditioned with so much garbage that a lot of this is going to sound, heretical. You know, it's going to be anathema to everything that you've ever learned in history if you've gobbled up the mainstream story. So we're going to stay humble, and we are going to approach everything he says using our critical thinking capabilities. All right, let's get into this. All right, Chapter 1 of How It Was in Reality. Epic of the 11th Century. 1. The First Roman Kingdom of the Old Rome. This chapter is also brief, as very little data has survived. It appears that in the Mediterranean in the era of 10th and 11th century CE, a kingdom emerged which could provisionally be called Romaic or Roman, or the quote-unquote the First Rome. Its first capital was a city in the fertile Nile Valley in African Egypt. Here, farming developed rapidly in order to feed the large population. Sciences and the first technologies originated here. Very little written evidence about this first kingdom has survived. Now, Fomenko takes the perspective of civilization kind of basically starting around this period of time. He doesn't go very far back and give humans credit about what could have happened before all of this. Now, he does this to his it's his mistake that he doesn't go further back and he doesn't see all the other stuff. But I guess also he doesn't focus on it either. But just keep in mind that he does not go like horribly far back in time. And the reason he doesn't do that is because one of his main data points that he uses to come to the conclusions that he finds is that he uses solar and lunar eclipses to rewind the clock backwards to see what eclipses match up with what events were recorded during said eclipse. And one of the things that he finds is that the eclipses only work to a certain point in history. Now, and then he ends there. He kind of stops there. The reason why his eclipse data only goes so far back is because our solar system was in a different configuration at that time, right? So our planet goes through several different cosmological catastrophes that literally changed the orbit of all of our planets, right? All of the planets were still in I don't want to say chaos, but they were still trying to find their equilibrium. Now, this takes a few thousand years to do. And in between these thousands of years is when Earth runs into some of these planets and has to deal with some of these events, which of course then changes the trajectories and the orbits on the orbital plane of everybody. So that's why when you look farther back, the farther back you go, you will actually see interesting eclipses recorded, like multiple eclipses in one night. Now that can't happen technically. It can happen if you have multiple bodies getting in the way of each other. So that's why when you go too far back, things won't make sense. And Fomenko, for his time scale, he doesn't go far. Once he runs out of eclipse data, that's where he considers civilization beginning. All right, I know that was a long talk, but just so you guys realize. So just keep that in mind while he talks. But that's okay, because a lot of the eclipse data seems to really help us date the later stuff, the Roman stuff that we talk about, the Byzantine stuff, the medieval, etc. That seems like it's good stuff. And the reason why he ends this paragraph with very little written evidence about this first kingdom has survived. It's because the reality is we don't have a lot of writings past the 14th or 15th century. Remember, a lot of the writings that are suddenly discovered that are supposed to be ancient only appear during this time period. So there's the fact that there's not a whole lot written about the earlier stuff, It's not because people were stupid and running around like cavemen. It's just that all of that stuff has since either been destroyed in cataclysms, or it's been changed by monks and Scaliger, etc. So that's where he's working from. All right, let's go. It is possible that in addition to that, Egypt was one of the main religious centers of both Romea of the 11th and 13th century CE. Notice how he's not saying BC, by the way. That's important. Right, he's moved the timeline significantly forward. He's gotten rid of like thousands of years here. And that's legit, and for other studies as well. All right. And after that, the great Mongol Empire of the 14th and 16th centuries. So he's got Egypt/Rome in the 11th and 13th centuries CE. And then after that, you have the great Mongol Empire of the 14th and 16th centuries. And this religious center would have been the focal point for the cult of the dead. Maybe this originated due to observations the ancient people made that in that area, due to the hot and dry climate, a corpse left in the burning hot sand would not decompose. Hence, they decided that this area would be most suitable as a burial site. And that's possible, but we also know that mummification is also a tradition brought on by other things way earlier on, and that's a different talk. The capital of the ancient African kingdom was not far from the mouth of the Nile and today is called Alexandria. It was here that the first writing originated, in the form of hieroglyphs, i.e. writing with symbols. It is probable that this method of communication and transmission of thoughts was the first to appear. If a person wanted to communicate something to others, he would draw a variety of symbols representing different things. And here we see his conclusion that hieroglyphs must be the earliest form of writing for two reasons. One, they're simpler as opposed to written language in the sense that we know now. And two, it would be the earliest form of writing that he has access to relative to the eclipses he's able to translate and roll back. But we, of course, know that we now have other evidence that very easily supports that there were more complicated languages much earlier than the ancient Egyptians. So it gets, his data, anyway, he rolls with it very strictly because he's following his mathematical abilities. So we'll respect that. All right, we'll move on. I know, I'm talking too much. I'll shut up. There were as yet no monumental structures as we know them today in ancient Egypt. Pyramids, sphinxes, temples, or obelisks. They were to appear significantly later, in the epoch of the 11th to 16th century CE. So he's putting that stuff pretty late. That's very interesting. When in African Egypt, an imperial cemetery was founded for the Tsars Khans of Romea and later of the great Mongol Russian Horde Empire. The deceased Tsars Khans of the great empire and other important high-ranking people were brought here. They were buried in luxurious tombs, sometimes with a large amount of gold and jewels. I wonder if he means that the people they find in the tombs of Egypt are supposed to be Mongols and stuff? I don't know. Prior to a long transportation, their bodies were embalmed to prevent decomposition during the journey. I guess he means that mummification was created so they could transport bodies from really far away, then bury them. That's a very unique perspective. All right, let's keep going. It is possible that the Egyptian Book of the Dead depicts the ferrying of the dead across the river Styx, i.e. the Mediterranean Sea. Ancient Greek myths tell us about Charon, the ferryman of the dead, who carried the deceased on his boat across the river Styx into the kingdom of the underworld, that is, as we understand it now, to the Nile Valley, Egypt. The name Charon probably originated from the Russian word Kornui, I don't know, but the translation of that word means to bury. An interesting side note related to catastrophism, the concept of the river Styx, that might actually have been born from when Earth may have had a temporary ring around it in its orbit, like Saturn. Think of a Saturn ring around Earth after one of the cataclysms. And this ring around the Earth is actually talked about in cultures all over the place. This ring is known as like a waving field of wheat in the sky, a river. A lot of cultures have this river concept. And why is that? Well, because the ring that they saw around Earth at that point in time was waving within the light and the other larger bodies floating through it. So it was affecting the little particulates in the ring around the Earth. Anyways, that's a whole other topic. But there's a real possibility that that's the origination of where the concept of the river Styx comes from, as well as, like Ra going across the sky in his boat and all of that. Anyway, we'll move on. The extent of the burial construction in Egypt itself shows that the Nile's estuary became part of the gigantic and powerful empire, which established its royal cemetery here. Oblivious to this, scientists were compelled to paint a fantastic picture of ancient, quote-unquote, Egyptians whose main, if not exclusive occupation was purportedly the burial of their local pharaohs. This being true, the volume of valuables, gold, etc., which was buried here was supposedly only amounted to a fraction of the state treasury. Oh, that's interesting. So basically what he's saying is that this is one of the dumb things that mainstream has done. The way everybody looks at Egyptians or ancient Egyptians back in the day in the mainstream is they literally just worshiped the dead and just focused on burying each other. Like that was it. Like that was that's like all Egypt was about. In the 11th century, the kingdom's metropolis moved to the Bosporus, where in a strategically advantageous location, the narrowest part of the Bosporus, emerged a city of Euros, which is also known as Jerusalem, also known as Tsargrad, city of the Tsar, also known as Troy. Now that's amazing. Approximately 30 kilometers north of modern Istanbul. It is here that the imposing ruins of this city and a fortress called Euros survive to this day. Later, in the 13th and 14th century CE, the kingdom's capital moved slightly south, where a new city emerged under the name of Jerusalem. Over the course of time, it was called Constantinople and later Istanbul. The name of Jerusalem was floating and at different times was applied to different cities. Very interesting. Various provinces, FEMA districts, were part of Romaic kingdoms. Rus, or Russia, was one of them, and it was the largest. In the era of the 10th and 11th century CE, for the first time, the paschal cycle was calculated. The first ecclesiastical calendar was created. Astronomy emerges, first intended to serve the ecclesiastical calendar and to observe seasonal changes in weather and climate. We will show you astronomical dates of the early zodiacs calculated by us, which fall within the era of the 11th century. Sometimes there are different solutions arising within the later epochs. So here we're going to begin to see him using the astronomical data to pinpoint why he thinks that certain civilizations existed in completely different times than the mainstream. We would like to clarify that a horoscope is the position of the planets in a constellation. For example, Mars in Virgo, Saturn in Pisces, etc. The horoscopes are calculated in the following way. Having located the position of the planets in their constellation at a certain moment of time, for example today, and knowing the numerical value of planets' orbit periods around the Sun, by plotting backwards or forwards multiples of these periods, you can obtain the positions of the planets in their constellations in the past and, of course, in the future. Currently, there are computer programs which allow us to date horoscopes found in the ancient manuscripts, frescoes, paintings, tombs, etc. We have created a program, Horos, designed specifically for the analysis of the ancient zodiacs and horoscopes, which fully utilize all the astronomical data recorded in them, the principal horoscope, additional auxiliary horoscopes, and so on. So what he's doing is, if they can find any kind of astronomical data that's in any of those old texts or works or pictures even, anything they can find, they can then translate that into their software, and they use it to roll back the clock to see where the stars were relative to the planets at the time. Now, this is where his problems come into play with respect to catastrophism, because past a certain point, nothing makes sense anymore, because there is works that exist saying that planets were in completely different parts of the constellations than they could ever have been now, but that's only because their orbits were different back in the day. So that's why there's going to be these discrepancies, but he can and does roll the clock back to a certain point in time. In this next section, he gives us 7 examples of his astronomical dating situation. So I'll read through them. So I apologize if they sound awkward, because they're sort of written awkwardly, but I'm posting them in the video as well, so you can read them yourself if you'd like. All right. 2. Astronomical dating of the new chronology. Years 969 or 1206. Zodiac SP from the tomb of Pharaoh Seti I. A colored fresco on the arch of the burial chamber. Ancient, in quotes, Egypt, Luxor, Valley of the Kings. Allegedly deep antiquity, in quotes. In fact, it appears that the first variant of this was made either in the 14th through the 16th of August 969 CE. The second variant would have been made in 5 through 7 August 1206 CE. So, Jesus, all right, so that's putting the tomb of Pharaoh Seti I in the CE/AD time period, and only 1,000 years from us now, technically. That's the implications of that. And now that is also using mainstream chronology. We know that mainstream chronology's dating is also wrong, but I'm going to stick with that for now. All right, item number 2, years 1007 or 1186. Zodiac of Mithra of Gedernheim. It is depicted on a stone tablet, bas relief. Europe, Germany, allegedly antiquity, in quotes, when in fact the first variant of this would have been in October 14th through the 15th, 1007. The second variant would have been 14th through 15th of October, 1186. Remember, these are all CE dates. These are not BC. Item number 3, year 1007. So he's got 2 1007s here, okay. The first zodiac SN from the tomb of Senemut. It is depicted on the arches of the tomb, but not in the burial chamber itself. In quotes, ancient Egypt, Luxor, allegedly deep antiquity. In fact, 14th through the 16th of August, 1007. Item number 4, year 1007. Oh, there's a lot of 1007s. Zodiac of Mithra of Apulum. It is depicted on the stone tablet bas relief. Europe, Dacia, allegedly antiquity, in quotes, but in fact, 14th through the 16th of August, 1007. So basically what he's doing is he's going through the cultures that recorded some sort of a cosmological event within on the tomb or their painting or whatever, and he's putting that particular event into the real time period of when that cosmological event happened with respect to the horoscope, etc. All right. Item number 5, year 1007 again. Zodiac MT on the Metternich Stela. It is depicted on the stone tablet found in Alexandria, ancient, quote-unquote, Egypt, allegedly deep antiquity. In fact, 14th through the 16th of August, 1007. Item number 6, years 1071, 1189, or 1308. Concise Zodiac KZ, stone bas relief on the ceiling of the temple in the ancient city of Ermont, quote-unquote, ancient Egypt, allegedly antiquity. In fact, the first variant appears in May 15th or 16th of 1071. Second variant, May 30 through 31st, 1189. Third variant, 6th through 8th of May, 1308. Damn. Ptolemy's star catalog, Almagest, allegedly antiquity, in fact, approximately not earlier than the 11th century. Damn. So he's putting the Almagest, or Almagest, I don't know how to pronounce it, sorry. He's putting this document that mainstream considers to have been done in AD 100 to 170. He's putting it not even earlier than the 11th century. Wow, basically 1,000 years later. So this is interesting because this literally correlates with other chronologist discoveries in using completely other data sets, by the way, that gets rid of essentially around 1,000 years. You know, it gets rid of the Dark Ages, for example. And he comes to the same conclusion, and he's using cosmological data. So that's pretty impressive, man. You have people using multiple approaches, and they are all coming to very similar conclusions about our true history. So that's why this kind of stuff is important. I'm not saying Anatoly Fomenko is perfect. He's not. But holy crap, man, look at that. You know, if he's just focusing on our more relatively earlier past here, the past 1,000-ish years or so. Amazing. All right, that does it for chapter 1. Those are some pretty heavy revelations. If you weren't slapped in the face with those, then either A, you already understand what's going on with chronology and you agree with it to some extent, or B, you weren't paying attention. Because what he just made claims of right there, that's pretty insane. And that pretty much just destroys anything that mainstream chronology is built on. And he's using, you know, real data, real scientific cosmological data to come to these conclusions. All right, don't forget, use critical thinking skills, stay humble, and we'll do the next chapter soon. All right.